Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, or, as they say in the world where the musical Merrily We Roll Along takes place, well, of course they do. Everything seems to go backwards there. But it is on that musical that we're going to be concentrating today. It's not the first time we've spoken about it here on Musical Talk, and I'm almost entirely certain it won't be the last, because, almost more than any other musical, each repeated viewing brings to your attention a new detail, or some clever symmetry, or some thought or connection which perhaps you won't have seen before. That's certainly the case for me. And it seems to be the case for almost everyone I've ever spoken to who has seen it or has been involved in it in some way. And at one level, it may be the show that proves the opposite of Sondheim's old adage, content dictates form. Because here, the content, at one very basic level, is remarkably simple. Would you go and see a show about three friends who fall out with each other and nothing else? In the sense that, at least, it doesn't really come to a conclusion or a resolution, and certainly not redemption. However, turn that backwards, and you have an interesting story, a fascinating story, a complex story. So this is the case where form has dictated content. The idea with Merrily We Roll Along is that the story goes backwards, allowing us to see how a corrupt man, and you can take the word corrupt in its many meanings there, became like that from his earliest, idealistic, more charming, more wholesome self. And that is a fascinating journey. And it's a show that very nearly almost follows its own lyrics. It starts out with a song, it starts quiet and soft with no surprise, and then you suddenly realise that it's a good thing going backwards. Well, it's a show which semi-regularly turns up at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and last year was no different. I saw a fantastic production there, and so taken was I by it that I sat down with the co-director and the musical director, Ben Pollard and Joseph Beasley, respectively, to have a good chinwag about the complexities of Stephen Sondheim's wonderful Merrily We Roll Along. Musical Talk.
I'm Ben Pollard, I'm the co-director of Merrily We Roll Along.
And I'm Joseph Beasley, and I'm the musical director of Merrily We Roll Along.
Well, thank you so much for talking to me. Now, your production of Merrily We Roll Along here at the Edinburgh Fringe was great. And what I liked particularly about it was the fact that you had engaged, I think, thoroughly with the text and the score, which is no mean feat for Merrily We Roll Along. If the original creators couldn't do it originally, and it took 25 years for this particular piece to cook, I'm always really very interested to find out which version people are going for, and why they've engaged with this version, and why they think that this is the version that they want. So I suppose this is probably a directorial question first, but why this version of Merrily? It's like Rudiger, you can pick which one you want.
Well, it is, although actually, as far as I understand it, when we dealt with Joseph Weinberger's, this is the version that they sent us, and I think this is the one that we have to do.
It's
so
the authorised,
it is the
authorised.
Yeah. I mean, the process that I always go through in directing is when I first get the script, I actually type it all up, which took me 3 days, and I did it in Germany, because that really helps me to understand the text and just to work out the bits that might need changing a little bit if the show is too long for Edinburgh. Also, particularly a show that runs backwards, it just helps you understand the plot.
I mean, both of you, did you know Merrily previously, and which versions have you seen?
Well, I hadn't heard of it until we discussed possibly doing it. And musically, the 2012 version is the version that we that the music people that we all listen to, because
the Maria Freeman version.
It's the one in the Encores version, the New York version, because the orchestrations were brilliantly done for that one. That's the version that I based most of what I did on.
I don't know. Forgive me. I assume that's Jonathan Tunick plus, is it? They all start that way, I know, but.
It was. It's the New York City Encores version, and it's got Lin-Michael Miranda.
But do you know who the original? Did they go back to Jonathan Tunick?
I honestly don't know.
I'd
have to check that.
Yeah, so a big hole of ignorance I managed to reveal about myself immediately.
And I've been really lucky. I saw it in the Donmar when I moved to London in about 2000, with Daniel Evans. I saw it in the Watermill in Newbury, 2006, and I saw the one at the Menier as well.
I didn't get to see it until the Donmar, exactly like you, but I've loved the original recordings, of course. So the original version from the early 80s, 81 or whatever it is, was one of my favourite and earlier Sondheim introductions.
Yeah, you see that? Because we didn't really listen to that, did we?
I didn't listen to the original version until far later, and when you listen back to it, you realise how much the musical's changed since its original version. That the lyrics have changed, the songs have changed, and it was interesting looking back to see what Sondheim added and what Sondheim took out to make it work better as a piece.
Well, can I ask that question? This is a question I'd like to ask both of you, actually, forgive me, which is that this is a highly revised piece and has been developing for 25 years. Can you see the joins? I'm interested both in terms of the book and also in terms of the score, because obviously, as you say, he tweaked the score, but the book itself has also fundamentally changed, and I'd like... Well,
yeah, no, I think, am I right in saying the book was changed with James Lapine, not with the original writer George Firth?
That's right.
I'm not sure I can see the joins, actually. I think that's what's clever in it. Because some of the earlier songs, one of Gussie's songs is sung by Frank in an earlier version.
Well, yes, but the Not a Day Goes By is sung by Frank, and it's not That Frank, one of the opening songs. I can't remember what the name of the song is.
Oh,
and
is it the old Hills of Home or something?
Well, the Hills of Tomorrow is the school anthem, which is sort of how it ends, I think, isn't it, in the original?
And I think, is that how they... Was that in the 2000 production at the Donmar? I have a feeling it started with that rather than with That Frank.
In the original version, they're at a party in exactly the way that Frank is, but it was a party of embarrassment because the film was an appalling flop. So it used to have lines in it with a film that bad, what on earth can you say? Marvellous, wonderful.
Clever.
The traditional stuff. But so the problem is, and that song is very similar to the opening number now. And so for my jaded old ears, I'm always waiting for the bit where they're all sneering behind his back, but of course not. They're all now yes men, aren't they, in the truest sense?
And in the opening number, in the original, they say, "How did you get to be here, Mr. Shepherd?" They're actually asking him the question, whereas in the new version, it's not so obviously directed at him. And I think that's...
It's an oblique question about how one becomes
who they are, rather than how he specifically became who he was.
Can you, from your... I mean, it's interesting that you've only recently come to the original, shall we say. Can you, from the score point of view, as a musical director, can you tell where something has been changed? Can you detect later Sondheim as opposed to earlier Sondheim?
Well,
it's a game I like to play with Saturday night as well, where there are two new songs. And because that's from the 50s, most people can spot one, but they can't spot the other, and I think that's absolutely fascinating.
I don't think there are that many differences, many large differences, particularly from what I've noticed. But the most interesting thing is that I think that the opening song, "The Hills of Tomorrow," all of the other songs in the musical were based on small fragments of that, and the fact that isn't in the new version, I think that's
well,
great.
good thing going is, if you like.
Exactly.
Really, I think for the new version, if you like.
Yes, but it's because the beginning of the tunes, practically identical to them.
I mean, it is a very integrated score in that sense, but I suppose if you've had 25 years to mix it together and borrow bits and pieces from your own thematic catalogue, I suppose you can do that more easily than you can at the time.
But
that's a question, by the way.
It is extremely... You go through and in Opening Doors, the accompanying figure is the tune to Old Friends, and all the accompanying figures come back again and again in Old Friends and in Opening Doors again, and Now You Know is the same tunes in Franklin Shepherd Inc. And so all these, it is extremely integrated, and if you go through and actually look at it and work it out, it's incredible how many different bits you can spot throughout.
The Blob comes up again, doesn't it? I mean, The Blob is a fantastic piece anyway, and it's over far too soon, if I may say. then you use it to underscore the scene afterwards, but the party scene as it continues, I think. But then it's also the melodic line for
Growing Up.
That's right.
Yeah, it's when Gussie's she's the same tune for both, and also the fact that the reprises come first because it's in reverse chronological order.
Well, Not a Day Goes By starts off as the Hurt version, doesn't it?
Yeah, and then begin, and then
in the order that we're seeing it, rather than their chronological order. It's very hard to describe as well. I think The Blob was actually cut from the original production. I believe it's an original song that's been reinstated.
I think it's fantastic, The Blob. I mean, it was one of our favourites to rehearse.
Yes. If it was a British musical, it would be called The Islington Set.
Yes, exactly.
which would make it then much more Noel Coward in tone and pronunciation, I think. So can I ask, I mean, there are a couple of obvious questions to ask about Merrily, and I can't avoid asking them, so I'm going to. Casting is challenging, it seems to me, for several reasons. First of all, there is an age range for the characters. They have to... I was going to say they don't have to age, they have to euthanize. That's not the right word either, is it? Because I'm putting a Y on the beginning rather than E. But they have to get younger by 20 years and more naive and more idealistic. And so that's a big ask of any actor. And then there's the issue of Frank. Now, Frank is an odd character because Frank is a mixture of a corrupted man. He has very horrible aspects, but he's charming. But he's also a man onto which people do project things, and he's too weak to stop them doing so. In fact, he says that. There's this overt line about saying yes when he means no. And that's the key line, it seems to be, for his character. To extrapolate's not the right word, to draw from that and to find the right actor and the way of making that work must be quite difficult. How do you find... I know you have to go with the people you've got, etc.
It is, and that's always the risk we take, is we decide the show that we love, and then you cast it, and you don't always know if everyone will be available, because we're with a group of young people who have to pay and give up a summer holiday. So we just take that risk, but I think it worked out great.
Oh yeah, no, the casting is excellent, but it is...
But we
it's
don't...
quite a challenge. I'd say as an actor, I'm not an actor, but if I were, I would find that a big ask.
Yeah, and we don't have 50 people we can audition for our main roles. No, we just...
Yeah, and I think we were lucky, for example, that Rory, who played Charlie, was so brilliant in that part. It was just,
I think he's born for that part.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah.
Yes, if he's not a frustrated writer, then he really ought to be.
Yeah.
So you weren't worried by that, because you have a sort of repertory...
always worried. Always. But I think with Edinburgh, we know that we're taking a risk, and we thought, well, if we come up here and the reviews may say, they're far too young, as they said on the Broadway production. But I think if you find, you can always find reasons not to do the show, and for us it's important that we just love what we're doing.
You do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there is no way of winning, because an actor is going to be whatever age he or she is. Whether that's young, old, or in the middle.
Yeah.
Because I thought it had exactly... The Maria Friedman version is often considered now to be the template from which everyone, the high watermark of how to do Merrily. And it was excellent. Not flawless, but it was excellent. However, the cast, I think, in one or two cases, struggled with getting younger.
Yeah.
Yours is slightly in reverse, of course, because you have a young cast, and I don't know, it's easier to project age than it is to project youth. Yeah. Would you care to express a view on that? No.
Gosh, I can't
It's
imagine.
It's imponderable, really.
I couldn't imagine pretending to be 18, no.
Well, I can imagine pretending.
Yes.
Whether I'd be very successful
Yes.
is quite another matter. And the challenges are not just in the casting and in the piece, because there are narrative consequences and difficulties which we'll talk about going backwards, but the same is true for the score, isn't it? The score reflects their return to idealism, in the sense that it becomes progressively less sophisticated, which I suppose is a double-edged sword, because by showing you're becoming less sophisticated, you're in fact showing how massively sophisticated you are, but I think that's just sometime. Is that boring for you as a musical director with your musicians? Because all the challenge, the beefy, challenging, difficult stuff, at least ostensibly, is on the front, and then it becomes more and more.
Well, no,
a reversion to the 50s, if you like.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Well, because the Sondheim is always challenging musically, and so everything opening doors is towards the end, and that's the most for the singing itself, that's the most difficult one to learn and to get together. And Our Time is a brilliant song, and I think that's such a beautiful song, and that's right at the end. And that's when they're the most idealistic, the most simple, the most youthful. So, I wouldn't say that it's boring at all. I think it's interesting, because you go back and you can see the progression in reverse.
Simple question for the layperson: is it simpler to play, or is it actually that's just a deception, an illusion, perhaps?
What, another Sondheim?
The second act, if you like.
No, I think opening doors for the band is very difficult, and but then there are songs in the first half that are very difficult. It isn't as simple as just getting more simple as you go through the play and as you go back in time. I don't think it's not as simple as that.
And even within opening doors, you've got the song within the song there.
You've got the Who Wants to Live in New York?
Who Wants to Live in New York?
Yeah.
It fits so perfectly in that song, but it doesn't stick out. Yeah. Does it feel musically different even within the passage of that song? Or do you think of it as a separate song? Because narratively it is.
Yes.
Is it musically?
No, I think Not really. 'Cause it fits in with. I feel that every time you hear that tune, and it comes back, I think, in three different instances, then it's completely different every time. All 4 different times it comes back, and every time it's in a different style, and it's
forever popping.
Yeah, exactly. It's basically to quote from the. And so no, I think he puts it so it fits in each time, and one thing I think that's really clever is that you never get the impression that actually Franklin Shepherd has only written one song and it's just being used over and over again. It sounds different every time, even though there's actually only one tune in the play that he's written that we hear.
Oh, I see.
But because we only hear one tune that he's written, but it doesn't feel like that when you're listening to it. You don't think that at all. And so it's really clever the way that he every time by just changing the style and by changing the orchestration, it becomes slightly different, and you don't feel bored by just hearing the same tune. And that's really clever.
I mean, in very broad brush terms, would you care to sort of identify what the 4 different tonalities or feelings are of those, the variants?
Well, there's the simplest one is when it's just Charlie, when it's just Frank playing the piano and Charlie singing in The Blob, and that's very similar when Frank sings Growing Up. And then there's the big Broadway, brassy, razzy hit at the opening of Act 2.
When Gussie's.
Yeah, when Gussie's singing it. And then there's the when they're performing it to Joe Josephson in the audition, or in yes, so
which is much more sort of
jolly and upbeat.
Upbeat, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes,
And it's funny because as a non-musician, you watch the show, and actually until you said that, I didn't really make the connection with it as being the same before, and that's why it's seamless.
Well, it's also one of these shows, I think, the more you watch it and see it again, you realise how much more there is, like a good piece of work, or a good work of art, perhaps. I mean, I've seen it now several times, different productions, but this production opened my eyes to some things I hadn't seen previously. Simple narrative devices as well. When we get to Charlie's television bust-up, shall we say, we get old friends first. And there's a line in it about there are too many lives at stake. You know, this friendship can't break up. There are too many lives at stake, is essentially the message with that exact phrase in it. But of course, it's just been immediate. That phrase is immediately following the almost, it's too appalling for words, but the death toll from Vietnam. We come out of a news story where they say 45,000 American soldiers have died. And then almost within 3 minutes, we're told that a friendship can't break up because too many lives are at stake. And you've been shown so brutally how little lives are worth, shall we say. I don't mean that in any sense, but within this narrative. But that's, that's going to fail because of the contextualisation that's already been given to it. And then there's other throwaways as well, isn't there? I mean, when he's in the song, Charlie, he says that bit about, I've gone in too far, but a friendship is like a garden, it has to keep on growing. And then, of course, that's actually one of the lyrics in Good Thing Going.
Yeah,
it
should have kept on growing
instead of just kept on, which is a lovely lyric anyway. So I had foolishly missed some of those resonances on previous productions, so I'd like to thank you because your production has opened up yet another layer in this never-ending Easter egg, shall we say.
What we found with audiences is quite a few people who know the cast have seen it more than once, and they didn't know Merrily at all. They're not necessarily a Sondheim audience, and they all say the second time, it was really good to see it a second time because you see more things.
Yes, once you know the plot, you can concentrate on the detail.
Yeah.
And that's true anything, isn't it? If anything that's got any quality in it, that might be worth a second reading.
Yeah.
And then, because personally, I hadn't, my priority before we started hadn't been to read the script and study it really carefully. As we've been going through, and you realise that all of the minor characters, obviously, all their stories are completely linked, and you can see when people say lines and then they go to the next scene and then you realise why they've said it. And so for me, as sort of having a bit more of the experience of an audience member, every time that you watch it, you do see something different. And we were because as it's such an interesting musical, I speak about it with some of the people in the band, and we say that it's just, every time you watch it, you don't get bored of it. You just notice new things, and that's why it's so brilliant.
But that's a mixture of the text, the score, but also direction and musical direction as well. I mean, forgive me, how many of those did you want to pinpoint, or are you happy to let the text do its work?
How do you mean?
Well, in a director's point of view, I mean, do some things you say, I can see a connection there. Sometimes, do you think I'll just make that bold enough so people can spot it and realise there's a hook, there's a trapdoor to this, or do you think actually I will let the text speak as it stands? I don't know if you ever feel that you have to overlay as a director, because directors you bring magic to a piece which I can't do.
I think a lot of it actually happens by accident during the rehearsal process, because the more the more we rehearse the text, the more we we realise that the connections and the poignancy of. There's a line where Mr. Spencer says to Beth, "Your mother would turn in her grave," and then because we rehearsed it more or less chronologically, you're talking about a character you haven't really rehearsed with yet, and then you realise when you start running it that you're talking about somebody who's dead who you do know, and it all happens retrospectively, really.
Just more of those connections in, because you were talking about minor characters as well. I mean, forgive me, there's at the party at the end, one of Frank's best friends, later better friends, is the inventor of the answering machine.
Yes.
Who got rejected.
That's right, at the very beginning, he's a rejected, he's a waiter, isn't he?
Yeah.
He goes to Joe to seek funding.
Tyler, it's called Tyler.
That's right. He goes to the producer to seek money, and of course, he doesn't get it from Joe, but he obviously gets it from somewhere, and he then goes on to become a success and becomes a friend of Frank. Whereas you see the complete reverse for Joe, because the very first time we see Joe in the piece, he's now resorting to handouts. So there's a parallel between the two characters.
Which I hadn't thought of until you brought that up, but that's...
Oh, well, very well.
Yeah.
Well, you can watch it one more time.
Yes, well, I've got to, so it's lucky.
One of the other problems with a plot going backwards, shall we say, is that it means that actually, in many ways, the heaviest, the fruitiest, the most difficult stuff comes up first. So many of the characters, when you first see them, are singing what would be their goodbye song if the play was going in chronological order. So, for example, Charles Kringus, we first see in this television interview, he's sort of set up as a bête noire, at least for Frank, or a wronged partner, or however you want to see it. Then we meet him nervously awaiting his interview, where he has a massive meltdown. But that's a hell of a song.
It's an amazing song.
Franklin Shepherdink is, and to say to an actor, by the way, you're going to come on and that's your opening number. The blood drains from the face, the knees go wobbly, I imagine. But you have an excellent actor in Rory.
Yeah.
But does that cause any difficulties for the actors to know that they start on their meatiest material and work backwards, or is that once again the illusion of the piece when in fact it's all meaty? It just the lighting just happens to be stronger in their first songs.
I think sometimes with younger actors,
lighting, obviously.
I think that younger actors don't tend to overthink things in the way that more experienced actors would, and they
or middle-aged idiots like myself.
Yeah, well, myself too. But I think they okay, we're doing this scene now, and it might take them a bit longer to realise where that scene fits in the context of the show. But they don't seem to be fazed by that, and that's one of the rewards of working with them.
That seems quite remarkable.
It is actually. I mean, Rory is
quite exceptional.
He is exceptional. He's exceptionally musical as well, because
he's going to study music next year. So he's
lost to the acting world.
He might do.
He might have to go into acting or
actor, muser, of course.
Yeah. And so and he's an exceptional musician. So for him doing a song like that, it's obviously very difficult for him, but it's not a challenge in the same way that somebody else doing it might be. So for him, the obstacle of actually singing the song isn't an obstacle at all, really, for him.
I imagine if you do have musical skills in the sense of being able to play, it just gives you that extra advantage, doesn't it? A score doesn't look like a frightening page of dots.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think with that song, you just have to, because it is quite tense watching it, because even Rory could miss out a word or be thrown by something, and I'm always quite relieved when they've got to the end of it.
It's getting married in the morning from
company. Which is here as well, and we went to see that.
I'm seeing that
second night we were here.
That's the gender.
It is, yeah.
Gender swap, essentially. Yes, quite. I'm looking forward to seeing that.
No, it was good. We enjoyed it.
Cuts. I'm afraid, obviously, there's always constraints here in Edinburgh in terms of timing. You've had to lose a couple of songs. The ones I spotted, and you must tell me if I'm wrong, were the review number, which is the one about the Kennedys.
Bobby and Jackie and Jack.
Yeah, I understand why that's been cut. It's a Hit, which is the song they sing after we've seen Gussie strut her funky stuff, shall we say, on stage, the show business husbands, or whatever the name of their successful
musical husbands,
Musical husbands, that's right. And the, if you like, I'm going to use the word sincere wrongly, but the sincere first-time version of Not a Day Goes By. Those are the three I spotted were missing, or missed. I understand why. Two of those, I think, are eminently removable. I think It's a Hit is a lovely song, but it's just, we're doing well. Aren't we doing well?
That was the first one that we...
And that was your influence, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To cut It's a Hit.
Because it was the one that we thought could be... It wouldn't affect the plot in any way at all. went.
You're also in awfully good company, because when the original LP, as it was, going back, of the 81 production came out, there was you could only get so many minutes, in the same way you can with a CD, actually, and that was the song they cut. And so for years, because obviously I don't read music, so I only knew musicals through, I was a boy at the time, I should just like to point out, but I can't read music, or I couldn't read music, so I relied on recordings for my musical interests. I didn't know it was there. And then, of course, later productions, this song came up, and I thought, I think I first heard it on an album of Sondheim Oddments, which was which was produced, and they said, the missing song from Merrily. I thought, I'll have a slice of this. So it's a great song, but I think you are in awfully right company. The same is also true for Bobby and Jackie, and I think that is also a sensible one to cut, because it's a diegetic song and you can remove it, because you can see with the reviews a success. But also, I must say that in 1981, the Kennedy clan was still a significant political influence, so we all knew the 400 members of the family.
It's a bit dated.
Well, it's 50 years out of date. It was 20 years out of date when it was written to prove how out of date it was, wasn't it? And now it's got another 30 years on the clock. So the average, this is a dreadful thing to say, but the average listener probably wouldn't know most of the Kennedys. Obviously the Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, but after that, it all starts going into the mist of time.
Yeah, I would, if I'd been in the audience and listening to the song, as I'm quite young, I wouldn't have understood all the pieces.
I think you have to be my age at least, and possibly my father's age actually, to really get the best out of it. So that was I think that's a sensible cut. Presumably you didn't have too much trouble making that decision.
No, we didn't really. I mean, it's also one of those songs when you start by listening to the score, it's a song that needs to be seen in context. It's the sort of one it's not particularly nice musically, but it does the job it's meant to do in the show.
It's a lightly satirical song, isn't it? Yes, quite. But not a day goes by, the original version. Do you want the truthful reason we cut that? Give me the truthful reason.
They could just never get the lines right, because there were three of them. They were always messing up with the words. It was very late in the rehearsal process, and we've got 1 hour 55.
I believe another song.
Exactly. So that was reluctant, and if we did it with more time, we'd have obviously kept with that, because it's really it's really poignant, and you get to see much more about how Mary feels about the man she loves marrying someone else.
Yes. Well, shall we talk about hurt? I think you identify in your notes in the very excellent programme that hurt has been identified as a thematic underscoring of the piece, if you like, in a narrative sense. It absolutely is. Hurt, however, comes in many flavours. How far do you have to help the actors? I'm not in no way trying to undersell performers, but when they're younger, they won't yet have had a lifetime of misery that the rest of us have all had to have. Is hurt something that's
it is, but I mean,
easy to bring up?
That's really something that my co-director Kerry Robinson, who is the head of drama at the school we're from, would take all the credit for, because she's the one who did a lot of the individual scenes with the actors, and she always says to them, have you had a situation in which you have felt this and that emotion?
Emotional dramaturg.
Yeah, and you'd be amazed with some of them who just would say, no. So it's not always easy, but
believe lucky bugger is the normal response
exactly.
to that, with a waving of the fist.
but that's absolutely her process for getting them.
It's so important.
It is, and also
it's got to be truthful, otherwise you lose it.
Yeah, and when you've got to act drunk and you're 17 and maybe haven't got extensive experience of
love your maybe. That's so good of you. Yes, you're quite right. They will have no understanding of it. But yes, you're right. The world experiences will be lesser.
Yes,
correct. But it came out beautifully. I mean, there was no sense of anything other than I won't say world weariness, but you could detect pain.
Yeah.
And actually, once again, Not a Day Goes By, as sung by Beth on the day of the divorce, is heart-rendingly painful. It is on the page, it is on the score, but that performance, I thought, also, you felt that was a woman who was full of sadness and hatred and happiness. Well, not happiness, relief, and still a tinge of odd love. There is that moment where they're not going to reconcile, but you think if there was ever a moment when they could, it's when he says, do you still love me? Which could be read in two ways, and her, did you sleep with Gussie? And he is at least honest about having slept with Gussie. And the line that you're somewhere a part of my life, I mean, that's very double-edged. Can I ask, how do you think the narrative works? Because the narrative has changed over the years. In the original version, I'm sorry to keep harking back to it, but I think it's, if one was writing a thesis about it, you'd have to go back to different versions. In the original version, there's the extra stage beyond looking at the Sputnik on the roof of the building in the 50s, which is if you like, the epilogue, where he goes back to his school, which is where he meets Charles Kringus, and they write the school song, which is the Hills of Tomorrow, and he gives a kind of speech. And in that speech, in the original production, he does acknowledge Charles, which, as you know, is the one thing he refuses to do later on. You know, that business about cutting you out of your life completely, and he's never allowed to be mentioned in parties and all this kind of stuff. So you don't necessarily know if there's going to be a reconciliation. You don't really know if there ought to be a reconciliation, but you do know that there's a recognition in Frank that something has gone terribly wrong with his life, and he's trying to become a little bit more humble or have a bit more humility. This version is bleaker in that sense because it doesn't have that. You know, that, if you like, is the loop that takes you back to the beginning in the original version. This version is and I'm going to put this in speech marks, a simple backwards telling of a story. And so the break is made, and the break looks like it's staying a break, and we just see them go back through to their idealistic youth. You know, there's no connection back to the ending. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Would you like to comment? You may say, well, actually, all versions are valid, because they are.
I think it really, just because we focused on this particular version, I've never had to make that comparison or think of that as a possibility.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. No.
So I feel that what we've got works well, but I would now be interested to, having directed the show, to look more at the alternatives and the history of it.
On the theme, as it were. Yeah, it's quite. Well, can I ask, do you think the play would work in reverse order, i.e. chronological order?
If it were to be like that, then you wouldn't see the same transformation of the characters, because going reverse order, you see it heightens your it makes you realise better that the characters have changed so much, because you see what they end up as, and then at the end you see this bright-eyed optimism. Whereas if it was the other way around, it would start off with their bright-eyed optimism and it would end up with everything having gone wrong, and I don't think that would work so well.
Dramatically, the drama comes from the format, doesn't it? Which is odd, rather than necessarily the story. Because I agree with you. I think if you ran it through forwards, it would be a perfectly accomplished piece. It would be a little bit soap opera-ish, in the sense that it will be incident without meaning. The meaning, if you like, is overlaid because it's going backwards. We, the audience, are invited to be, almost more than we would usually be, invited to be the person who judges the characters before us, and we judge because we're going backwards to see how it happened. If it went forward, I think it would not be a successful piece.
Which is exactly what happens in Romeo and Juliet, as I think I put in my
programme
notes. But I was just remembering my GCSE English. But it starts off with them dead, and it says this is now the 2 hours traffic of our stage. And I remember my English teacher saying to me that the purpose then of reading the play was to get to see why that had happened, which at the time was quite an interesting thought.
Flashback.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, I don't think musically you couldn't have Our Time as the opening number of a show, and you couldn't finish with that, Frank. It would just be bizarre, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But even if you, because originally it was a play, wasn't it?
Yes.
In the 1930s, without music, but obviously still going backwards.
Yeah. And we did talk about rehearsing it forwards, and it would be quite interesting to perform it in that.
I've known it done once. I've only known one group, and I can't remember who they were, but they said as a rehearsal exercise, in order to help people understand their characters and also get the plot as it would have actually been experienced, so to inform the performances, they did it the right way forward, if you like, which I think is fascinating, but it would not be good drama on. I wouldn't pay good money to see it. I'd be invited along to a rehearsal. That'd be fun.
Yeah, that'd be good to do.
And because our time at the end, it's a really moving song, because you see what's happened before, and you see what they've lost, what they had at the beginning of their lives, they've lost as time's progressed, and seeing that's why it's such a moving song. Whereas it wouldn't work if it was at the beginning.
That's right. Yes, it has the power it has in it is invested in it because of what will happen in their lives rather than what has happened in their lives. And it's only us as the audience who are privileged to see what will happen in their lives. I've got a question for you both. This is a stupid question, and I hate asking it, but actually I secretly love asking it. Merrily we roll along 2. What happens? There isn't one, but obviously.
I could only see it getting worse. I just think he'd be utterly washed up on Hollywood Boulevard somewhere. I used to be somebody, and
well, he's going to become Joseph Josephson, isn't he? In a strange sense, he's going to be one of Gussie's cast-offs.
Yeah.
Ultimately, presumably, will go bankrupt.
Whereas Gussie, I think, would go from strength to strength.
she'd become a grande dame on the stage.
She would, yeah.
Yes. Although she's quite the most awful character in it.
She is, but she's my favourite character.
Why
actually.
is that?
I just think she has all the best lines. That's
She's hilarious.
the comedy is her one-liners are just.
Cut my veins because I'm not going to have anything to live for, kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Do you know, I find that a bit much, but I know that's the character.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to know anyone
She's
like that.
calling the Surgeon General to have her tongue cut out.
Yeah. Well, she's a good theatrical type,
Yes.
isn't she?
Yeah, I mean, maybe she's not a very well-rounded character, but she is the Broadway star, isn't she?
And she is the one who makes a success of nothing in a strange sense, isn't she?
Yeah.
Because she is, I mean, in the terms of the lyrics, she's referred to as the girl. You know, leave your name with
leave
the
your name
girl.
with the girl.
And the girl being Joseph Josephson's secretary. And once again, this is the wonderful thing. I saw it. You were subtle enough to make it plain without making it overt or too obvious. But you know, we know that he does. There is a throwaway line about her Gussie being Joe's secretary.
Yep.
And we see her as the secretary. And actually, we see her as the secretary in a complete. You know, as secretary, she is. This sounds awful, but you know, she isn't Gussie. She is the secretary. She's still in those early days of her life where she doesn't yet feel she can sort of vamp it. Should we say, for want of a better phrase. You know, she is still a demure secretary, if I may speak in stereotypes. And I love that. And then the next time you see her, she's on his arm. You know, so she's made her leap. She's... I'm merely making observations about the performance of the production. But, do you have a favourite character from a musical point of view, or is that a silly question?
I'm not sure I could pick a favourite character, really. No,
Well, which character this is the question for the two of you. Of the three, the trick-tish, if you like, of Mary, Charlie and Frank, who do you most identify with or have most sympathy for? They are two different things. You may confer or show your working
Well, I would hope that in the future, I would, rather than sell out to make money, I would stick and do what I believed was stick to my artistic instincts. So
You're a Charlie.
So I hope that I would be in the future. So, but I have to wait and see.
I would definitely be Charlie, in the sense of if I had to act one of those roles, that Charlie would be me. I'd never be a Frank.
I agree with you, I, to be honest. And emotionally, I feel closer to you. You know, I feel the pain of a lost friendship much more than... I can't... You know, he's just a weak man. He's a weak man with a bit of charm and some talent.
I mean, the only thing I wonder, do you think by the time you get to 40, are you really so hankering for your 18-year-old friendships? I think people move on a bit more than maybe...
Yeah, no, that's true.
You just become a bit more... You understand that the friends are the people who are around you when you're in that period of your life, and it's not going to be like that forever, and you move on.
But it's a case of, but that's addressed as well in the piece, isn't it? Because it's actually about why don't old friends want you to change,
yes.
says Frank.
We go.
And he's right, because actually you do have to change. It's about bringing your friends with you or not.
Well, that's what Mary says in the opening. She says, we go way back, but seldom forward.
Yes.
I mean, she all actually, talking about Gussie's lines, Mary's got some wonderful lines as well. When Gussie wanders in and she says, the plot thins.
Yes. She reminds me, it's only on the level of witticism. Are you aware of Frank Lesser, the composer?
Yeah, Guys
Frank
and Dolls.
Lesser famously had a wife who wasn't very popular. But they were a devoted couple, and they used to go everywhere together. And there was a famous Oscar Levant was his name. He was a great pianist, but he was also a great American wit, as all people called Oscar seem to be. And they were at a Hollywood party, and in came Mr. and Mrs. Frank Lesser. And Oscar Levant said, "Oh look, it's the evil of two Lessers." So unpopular was she. I think it's just worth reciting because that's the level of operation that I think Mary is going for.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for bringing Merrily to Edinburgh. It was a beautiful production, and it's been lovely talking about some of its intrinsic difficulties with you. But can I ask if I was going to ask you, what will you take away from this production of Merrily? It's a question for both of you. Is there some moment of particular challenge that you defeated, or some moment that's so sublimely beautiful when you saw it on stage? Was the catering good? What?
I think just feeling that we managed to do what we set out to do, because last year we did Sweeney Todd, and everybody knows Sweeney Todd, and hundreds of people come and see it because it says Sweeney Todd. And
you don't even need to write Sondheim on it.
You don't.
It's had its own,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it was Daniel Evans who said recently that you do, when he was at Chichester, you do 2 for the audience and 1 for yourself. And our last production was Les Mis Schools Edition, which was for the audience, really.
Les Mis sells itself as well.
Yeah, of course it does. And to have achieved what I think we set out to do, and to put this lovely show on the stage and introduce 18-year-olds who always say, can we do the Book of Mormon, can we do the Book of Mormon, to the history of musical theatre.
There's better stuff out there.
Yeah, I just feel we achieved what we set out to do.
Yeah, and it's I think it's the best one, that because we've done 4 together. This is the 4th one, and productions, and I think this is the best one that we've done together. And because it's just it's such a joy to do, because unlike Sweeney Todd, when by the 8th performance I got slightly bored of it, to be honest.
You can get todded out.
Exactly.
I think.
But for this one, as you go along, as I said before, you notice different things, and you never get bored of it, and you sit there on the balcony listening to all the dialogue, and you notice different things every time, and it's just it's so brilliantly written, when all of the lyrics are wonderful, as opposed to Tell the Tale of Sweeney Todd. His skin was pale and his eye was odd. They're not the best lyrics in the world, but I don't think you could find a.
So you're a blasphemer, but yes, you're right.
But I don't think you could find. I don't think you could pick out a line in this and you could say that's weak in any sense. I think it's just all so brilliant. That's why it's been so enjoyable, really, just because it's such a brilliant musical.
It's a proper Fabergé egg, isn't it? Sweeney Todd, I think you enjoy in the theatre. I think Merrily We Roll Along, you enjoy when you get home. That's the way I see it. I fell in love with it in the mid-'80s, and I'm still here. So, I just want to pick you up on the Daniel Evans comment, though, because actually that's really interesting. 2 for the audience and 1 for yourself.
I'm sure that's what he said, yeah.
Because it's also in the text, isn't it, of Merrily. They
absolutely,
because they decide to do 2 commercial shows before they want to do, which they never get round to, which is turn left.
Yeah.
Or take a left.
Take a left.
So they're doing 2 shows for the money, for the audience, if you like, and then 1 for themselves. So everything we've said today has been self-referential, and I really do think ought to be turned into a musical, although title of show is gone. So what are we going to do?
No, exactly.
Well, gentlemen, I can't tell you what fun it's been, because it's been so nice talking to people about a piece of work that they've put a lot of work into. And it is a triumph. It's a great success.
Thank you very much.
I think you should be very rightly proud, and I've enjoyed it immensely, so thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Musical talk. There we are. That was Ben Pollard, the co-director, and Joseph Beasley, the musical director, discussing with me their production of Merrily We Roll Along, and I hope giving us all some insights. I think, as you heard in that conversation, it is one of those shows, the more you discuss and dissect it, the more you get out. And if that sounds a bit like an onion, i.e. layer after layer after layer, then the corollary of that, which is that it will make you cry, follows on. Well, that's it for this week's episode of Musical Talk, and as I behold the fields of tomorrow, also known as the future, I can't help but noticing there's another episode of Musical Talk next week. So why not, just for a laugh, tune into that? Or, if you live in the world where Merrily We Roll Along takes place, why don't you finish listening to that episode and then start listening to this, until you work your way triumphantly to the very first episode of Musical Talk in 2006. And good luck with that. So, for the time being, it's time for me to say goodbye. And there's only one way for me to do it, and it's like this. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2017. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our brand new website, musicaltalkpodcast.weebly.com, or subscribe to us on iTunes, and follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos. Well, I'll start. The way I normally ask people to start, if that's okay, is to give me their name, their involvement in the show, and at least one of you should mention the show, because you'll be surprised how many people forget. That's, I think, important element.
It is, isn't it?